All right. Welcome back to Above the Bell Curve. Today, I want to start off talking about another concept that Freud penned later on in his life, and it may be one of the only ones that's salvageable in his corpus of work, which is the death drive. And that is when people have consecrated themselves to the material world. They will often find themselves, no matter how noble they were in their youth, falling more and more to savagery, barbarianism, and outright sadism as they get older and older, and they see their natural abilities slipping through their fingers. They will want to take it away from other people. And it is cathartic to people who have geared themselves in such a way that is against the teachings of Christ and is against the wisdom of all the holy men that have brought up strong and venerable societies. If you are a slave to hedonism, you never really have anything. It's fleeting, always fleeting, fleeting, fleeting. Whereas when you fast and you deprive yourself and you strive for something greater than just the material things and the instantaneous gratification of pleasures and hedonism, then you get this shining golden light inside of you that is very much the basis of all religions, is tapping into this, and that is immortal. That is something worth striving for. So, people have been talking a lot about Luigi Mangione and the United Healthcare CEO killing. And that falls into a concept written by Noam Chomsky of worthy victim, unworthy victim, because naturally people die every day. So why are people so upset about this? Well, it's because as a executive, and I have family in executive branches, so I'm not somebody who's coming from a place of hatred or dissociation. That corporate class has existed for a period of time to soak up attention and blame for the shareholder class. Basically, since 1982, 1986 or so, the CEO, COO, CFO's job is to take orders from the shareholders and then take the blame when things don't go the proper way that they were supposed to on paper. That's their job. And it's very, very strange that people have forgotten that in the higher echelons of society. Because everybody on the bottom echelons of society have done their research and they know how destructive healthcare insurance companies are. They usually have suffered from it themselves, or at least have horror stories from people that they know, family, friends. The horrible rigmarole of navigating through the medical system is there by design. It's a Kafkaesque labyrinth, a nightmare meant to slow people down and prevent them from getting the proper health care that they need. And I know the healthcare system is deeply, deeply flawed, but the whole reason why it's deeply, deeply flawed is because it is based on profit. And if a healthcare system is based on profit, you're going to have a macro system that poisons people in order to gain higher and higher bottom lines in the healthcare profits. If the healthcare is designed for making people healthy, it will be designated as honorable and venerable people will invest their time and energy into it. And oftentimes, and you can see this throughout history, they will invent wonderful, miraculous things and give them to the world for free. That's what you inspire when you make a good, healthy, moral, just system. That's what Christianity inspired for a very long time. The destruction of trees has been a very, very nasty thing that Christendom has not really, it's kind of co-signed, but more in the Germanic cultures than the Celtic cultures. But I have read a lot of accounts of people chopping down holy trees specifically because people like them, and that made the area significantly worse because those were long-term consequences and harborers of life. Consequences and creators of life. The trees and the smaller plants that we have dotting our landscape are some of the greatest chemical factories, carbon to oxygen translators that we have. and they produce much, much better oxygen than algae. Much, much higher concentrated, pure oxygen than the stuff coming out of the swamps, which we think that we can replace, even though we are also designating the swamps to be drained off and turned into a theme park, which people won't be able to enjoy if they can't breathe. So let's try not to pay paradise and put up a parking lot. It really didn't work out, and it hasn't worked out, and it won't work out. So keep that in mind, that the trees are there to be nurtured because they will in turn nurture you. They block the sunlight from bleaching out everything, and they translate that extremely violent solar radiation and UV into energy. That is an amazing thing. We can't do that nearly as effectively. Neither can any of our technologies, and certainly not our concrete, which does hardly anything at all, except for get worn down. In the developing Americas, the planter class, and the word planter comes from plantation. The first plantations were designed by James VI / James I. I don't really care to know any about all of that Scottish coup stuff that happened after Mary Queen of Scots. What happened is Northern Ireland was taken over by bloody and nasty border reeves that were brought over from Northumberland, from the Scottish-English border. And they set up a line in between Tyrone, Ulster, and the rest of Ireland's counties. And they established plantations to grow crops for English armies. That eventually would lead to what caused the Irish potato famine, which is England as a dominating force bringing over New World crops into the potato, into Irish bogs, and a specific blight in that bog, which the potato had no defense for, hyper-proliferating, and taking advantage of the fact that the Irish farmers had clustered their potatoes very closely together because they were forced to export a large portion of their food and all their meat to the British, who had enslaved them. So keep that in mind. Slavery originally was induced by the English on the Irish. It wasn't a white on black thing, which, white and black aren't real historical terms. They have no historical contingency whatsoever. The closest thing they come to having any accuracy is the amount of time you spend farming and being sane and out with your fellow man and woman and spending time with animals like your dogs and seeing the beauty of nature, and how much time you spent locked away inside, like the Southern plantation class of America, who all the while had paranoia of slave uprisings constantly on the back of their mind, naturally, because people naturally strive for freedom. And of course, and that would fuel all their paranoia and all their hatred and the breaking of their slaves' legs and the immense cruelty that was exercised. It was all spawned from their own paranoia, their own locking themselves away, because a machete could be coming towards their face at any moment. Naturally, because they're doing terrible things and they could expect terrible consequences because of that. And so, this plantation class is indeed the heartblood of Confederate philosophy. And the Confederates naturally took American potential, threw it into the toilet, and then celebrated their own loss afterwards, all the while saying, "I'ma get you!" And, well, they tried. Like, they poisoned their own land, they salted the ground beneath their feet, and, that was part of our country, yes. And now the dirty South is very, very, very dirty. And most of the good people, come from Appalachia. It's not the South. Arkansas and Alabama are terrible places. And I hate to say it, but they're filled with terrible, terrible people. A lot of the good people died in the 80s and 90s. Just straight up. You can study why. They either died from coronary, or they died from drugs, crack and cocaine, And now recently, fentanyl's kind of cleaning up after all of the chaos, and it's like the street sweeper wiping out things to make way for the next chapter. It's very, 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 very sad, but ultimately it is the final stage in a long-term drug smuggling operation that the CIA undertook when they decided to coup multiple Latin American governments and set up a cocaine smuggling route from Bolivia to Colombia, where it would be turned into crack through Colombian labs and then distributed out. Little Rock, Arkansas, where Bill Clinton was governor, was the capital, the crack capital of the world for a period of time. And this is exactly, one of the things that has caused, the destruction of Arkansas and Alabama and other dirty South states. The police around our country have been crying and bemoaning, and for natural reasons, the inability to go into the red-lined areas and actually stop these things from happening. They're literally not allowed to do that. You can go on Joe Rogan and you can listen to a police officer talk about that specific thing. It's one of the things that really started the discussion in the national dialogue, is the fact that police offices are allowing these cocaine and crack distribution networks to be set up for 30 years. And the police want this to stop because that's their own communities. And only a few people in these nasty fraternities are safe and can go away in their gated communities and not ever have friends and family in the area and never suffer because of the consequences of their actions. The police want that to stop. And ultimately, it's not about the police themselves. The police are not the thing that will solve our problems. It's our community will solve its problems. And the police are part of the community. And I've heard like 50% of the police saying like, yeah, I don't want to do this, that, and the third, but I got it. It's on the books, da 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 da. So we gotta help them. They're just people like you and me. They're not members of the CIA with a very selective familial hiring process that only get off of Yale Skull and Bones and stuff like that, and legacy, McMansions and stuff like that. Well, I guess they would be real mansions for these people, but still they're filled to the brim with paranoia and misery. Like I'm not jealous of those nasty estates that the elite like to set up, because I know exactly, how that is only a mask for the insecurity on the inside. And most of the people that are really, really, really good at investing actually have some form of brain damage that they've received. This was proven in a psychological study where they can't stop. They lack the ability to know when is the cutoff point for things. And so no money is enough money. It's never enough. And that is actually the catchphrase of Slanesh. So I hope that that's actually Slaneshi influence and something that people can dispel instead of brain damage that people can't help. So just be willing to get involved a little bit and be safe and be smart, and don't sell your freedom to a stranger. So don't talk to cops, blank period, but know who is on your side and know how to communicate with them in order to make your community a better place and prevent things like what has already happened in the last 30, 40 years from happening anymore. That's my advice. Every legion has a liege. The people who say online, we are a legion, we do not, da 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 da. Those people are role-playing their little fantasy about serving Satan, because that is ultimately the liege for a lot of those, esoteric, we got special symbols in our computers so it makes it, Solomonic. It's not. It's more fantasy. I would very much suggest that anybody who is digging what I'm saying about the Freemasons and all the fantasy crap and the weird Illuminati hooded parties and the Henry VIII orgies, I would strongly suggest that you watch a YouTube video called Ward Rackley and the Coven of Artemis by Squirrel Tactics. It's a King of the Hill examination video about, basically one of the kids that would be like an entry point into Freemasonic groups by humiliating the people he's around, the losers that gravitate towards his loser coven, enough to the point where they have no friends and everybody hates them and they've had their asses kicked to the point where they have a grudge and a bone to pick with society, and so they do horrible things. You know, that's about it right there. You know, modern people, especially through Hollywood, have a horrible understanding of Viking culture. What the Vikings were, they weren't some esoteric, battle masters, servants of corn, or something like that. They were actually fleeing disasters in Denmark. They were fleeing a massive flooding as Scandinavia thawed and turned their land into marsh. And so they broke down their houses and they built very, very impressive ships with them. And then, unlike a lot of other people who colonized or pillaged, they sailed to an area and then set up shop and then lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years, like North Ireland, Dublin, Scotland, of Gaeldom, of Bruges in Holland, and Normandy and Gascony, that little bay area in Bordeaux, Aquitania. That's where they would set up, and it's interesting that you see kind of a repeat of the Phoenicians setting up shop, but instead of straight up Phoenician colonies, there would be major Viking settlements that they would build and build and build. And I find that very fascinating, personally. I don't think that the Vikings were nearly as evil as they're portrayed. I think that a lot of times it was just out of necessity. And if anybody's interested in Viking culture, I would strongly suggest watching the anime Vinland Saga. It's very violent in the first half, but it straightens out in the second half, and it's got really nice morals, and it's really well animated, and it's got good music and stuff like that. I would strongly suggest it. A lot of the misunderstanding of European culture comes from Freemasons taking stuff and twisting it and twisting it. And it's interesting that they would use Lovecraft as a major prophet of Freemasonry, that he would create these concepts out of mistranslated German and Celtic folklore, and he would turn them into dark, dark fairy tales that would go on to influence theosophy very, very, very directly, and that would trickle directly into the Conan the Barbarian stories that were written in the 30s, which was a theosophical, Lovecraftian-based universe. And little spoiler, the Emperor of Mankind, that's Conan. That's Conan the Barbarian, actually. It's Conan the Barbarian 38,000 years. Or, let's see, probably like 41,000 years in the future. Somewhere around there. Or actually, no, that's 30K, and then, excuse me, I'm not an expert. But I'd very much like to go over the history real quick on my whiteboard and show you exactly how we can draw the line all the way from Lovecraft to League of Legends. Oh man, this isn't working at all. I need to get a better one of these. Well, I'm gonna make it work. Almost done. Okay. Alright, sorry for anybody who's just listening. This is probably going to be a very boring segment. Now, let's get this red marker here, and let's start to pen it out. So, starts off Celtic mythology and Germanic mythology. And that, poorly translated, goes directly into H.P. Lovecraft. Who, by the way, very interesting books if you're not easily scared. Now that goes into the Freemasonic Project. Alright, like that. And then that goes into Conan the Barbarian. Very, very, very cool stories, would strongly suggest them. Now, it gets very, the timeline starts to shorten up a bit, and from Conan the Barbarian, it goes into, interestingly enough, Hyperborea and all that would be directly in the Nazis' rhetoric. But from Conan the Barbarian, it goes into Dungeons and Dragons. So. Scary Gygax. And from Dungeons and Dragons, go into things like the Elder Scrolls. We go into things like RuneScape. We go into things like Warcraft, you know, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and go down the timeline into Warcraft, and specifically Warcraft 3. One of the greatest games of all time. Best paired with Diablo 2. So, from Dungeons and Dragons, it goes to Warcraft 3. And from Warcraft 3, it goes into it was called Defense of the Ancients, Dota. And that goes into League of Legends. So here you go. Here's the timeline. There we go. Right there on the timeline. You can see how the flowchart works. Right there. All right. Now, let's get into the House Tudor of England. The House Tudor was originally from a Welsh family called Fyshan. But after Henry VIII, as a child, went to a bunch of those nasty Illuminati orgies, probably attended by, you know, various nasty queens from around the realm, he also had this little bull mask with glasses that you can find on his Wikipedia page. It's in a museum. And he'd been going to these nasty Illuminati mask orgies for, you know, a very long time, since he was a little kid. So he was effectively a grooming victim, Henry VIII. And so naturally, he wasn't satisfied with any of his wives. He was a grooming victim, you know. And that's what did in England, ultimately. You know, the Plantagenet dynasty is very noble. And Wales is, otherwise known as Cymru, is a place full of some of the most beautiful and uplifting people I've ever seen. So it's very sad that England could have been corrupted by the Freemasons the same way as the Netherlands, the same way as Prussia, the same way as America. It's very, very sad, in fact. And you see the same consequences of utter humiliation and destruction down the road when it started off very noble and with good bearing. And tons of production. So I think the neoliberal religion would probably be Unitarianism. And that has a little joke parody religion called Unitology in Dead Space, one of my favorite, if not my favorite, horror games that I played as a little kid. Very, very, very scary. The audio is what makes it extremely scary. And if you can manage to, like, you know, get a good gaming setup, which I visited a friend's house, and he had like a closet with like extremely advanced audio. So it was like claustrophobic, dark, good audio, and I was very young, and I played the original Dead Space, and that put me on another level of terrified. That was pretty good. And I think the language of neoliberalism would be Esperanto. So if you want to be like a big brain Freemason who goes around the world and dominates everybody like an alpha brain, learn Esperanto. Learn Esperanto and join the Church of Unitarianism. That sounds like a good plan for you, buddy. I want to get into, so now I'm talking about the Freemasons, Opus Dei. Opus Dei. Vladimir Ledichowski of the Jesuits called out Opus Dei from the beginning, that they were of a quasi-legal and Masonic character. They started off teaching law and architecture, and the leader, who was beatified by the pedophile Pope John Paul II, he was very inconsistently, you know what, let's dial that back a little bit. He was a liar, and he was a manipulator, and he used language that aligned with the language of the prophets and the language of holy men to weasel his way into the good graces of the Vatican after basically being a pariah for a period of time and expanding based on the routes that were set up by his more, you know, off-the-cuff associates. And what Opus Dei did in Argentina, when there was a tremendous... This is around when the current Pope, Bergoglio Francis, was there and doing stuff in Argentina. Opus Dei was saving children from the children of the parents of people who were being tortured with the same electroshock equipment that Reagan had sent out of the country. And they were being shocked until their bones would break. They would break their own bones from shock because they were being tortured so badly. And this was happening in Argentina, and the Masons were very heavily involved in this. And the organizations that instituted a lot of this, not Opus Dei that was saving children and trying to get them to safety and to families that would raise them, the organizations that were involved in this and the people that were involved in this were also involved in coupping the Vatican and murdering John Paul I. It's very easy to put on the timeline if you have, you know, the 14 hours of reading that incorporates the Masonic subversion of the Vatican book that is on YouTube, and it has a little hanging pendant cross. I'll link the audiobook in the description of this video. It's very important to read because it's packed full of information, and it's 90% plus accurate. So definitely good to look into the Peronists, they're called, people of Opus Dei. And they actually come from Francoist backgrounds in Spain. That's Pope Pius XI and his close ties to the Axis. Naturally, it's, you know, Spain and, or excuse me, yes, Spain, Phalange of Spain and Italy, they were kind of on the same side, although Spain was very neutral. It just comes from the tradition of trying to play both sides. So keep that in mind. Not everybody in Opus Dei is bad. In fact, like the SS officers that saved Jews during the Holocaust, a lot of them are good. But they are definitely considered the white Freemasons of Spain, I've heard them being called. Although white and black aren't accurate terms, I think they're best described as Catholic Freemasons. And you can be a Catholic Freemason after the Second Ecumenical Council of 1965 that was only initiated after the assassination of John Paul I. So, I think I'm going to wrap up on a little thought about architecture. Quality wood is good, but tile and steel really pull a build together. You know, I was looking around and I was just, drywall, wood, drywall, wood, drywall, wood. Then you look at a kitchen, and that's where the heart of a home is. Got a lot of tile, you got a lot of steel protecting the edges of the tile. You know, you got a lot of steel around the cooking area, you got a lot of tile up on the walls, so that it makes it easy to clean. That's nice, you know? I think that a well-designed bathroom and a well-designed kitchen can double the price of a house around, well, excuse me, not double. That's a little insane. I think that a well-designed bathroom and kitchen can add an eighth of the base profit onto the final bill. Just straight up add it. That's unlike almost anything else that can be done other than roof and patio and big stuff like that. Like, you know, personally, I think that a in the ground swimming pool actually takes profit away. You know, it's like, oh wow, I want to bathe in either chlorine water that's caustic or, you know, rotten water, or spend a mint circulating fresh water. You know, that's not fun. And then it's like you have this whole bunch of ground that acts as a water soak. It's like a sponge. And you just take that out and you fill it with water. It's already at max capacity, so it's just boom, floods. I don't like pools. Pools are dumb. So, signing off. Pools are dumb. Take care, y'all.